Good morning. The Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. Today, the committee will execute on one of Congress's most indispensable responsibilities, oversight. Whether it is to defend the taxpayer or to stop malfeasance, Congress possesses the, quote, means of inquiry, as founding father James Wilson put it, to help inform our legislative work. But in recent years, the Senate has allowed our oversight muscles to atrophy. Oversight rarely occurs within our standing committees, and I believe our country is worse off for it. It is a void that I tried to fill as ranking member, and it's a front where I will continue to lead as chairman. To that end, we will be making a motion to authorize a subpoena to Massachusetts Port Authority today. This authorization vote stems from an investigation that I initiated last Congress as ranking member. In October 2023, I began investigating the effect of President Biden's immigration policies on aviation and airport security. A key focus of this investigation has been the sheltering of illegal immigrants at domestic airports. In January 2024, following reports that O'Hare Airport was housing illegal immigrants, I and 6 other members of the committee sent a letter to the mayor of Chicago. The letter noted that the obligations that come with receiving federal airport improvement funds, including that, quote, the airport and its facilities must be available for public use as an airport. I subsequently sent letters to the Federal Aviation Administration, the association representing the owners and operators of commercial airports, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which operates John F. Kennedy International Airport. On March 4th, 2024, I, along with other Republican members of the committee, sent a letter to Massport seeking information about the illegal aliens living in Boston's Logan International Airport, which had been acting as a sanctuary airport since at least July 2023. You can see this image is not what one expects of a typical airport, and it is certainly not what one expects of an airport receiving federal taxpayer funds and then diverting those funds for the political agenda of the White House rather than devoting those funds for the stated purpose, which is to run an airport that is available to the public. After I sent the letter, my staff reached out to Massport a total of 9 separate times, by email and by phone. In August, having still received no response to my March letter, I sent another letter instructing Massport to preserve all records referring or relating to 1, the housing or sheltering of illegal aliens at airports or airport facilities, 2, law enforcement incidents involving illegal aliens at or involving an airport, and 3, communications with federal officials. I requested a response by August 23, 2024, and stated that failure to respond could result in compulsion. I never heard a thing. To date, the questions from my March 2024 letter have not been answered, though I will note that in the past few days, my staff has had improved conversations with Massport about its compliance. That said, Massport was given ample opportunity to engage with the committee. Its recalcitrance should be contrasted with the approach of the City of Chicago and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, both of which engaged and provided requested documents and communications. That's why we're not voting on any compulsory process concerning Chicago O'Hare Airport or JFK Airport, because those 2 institutions made the decision to comply with Senate oversight. It was Massport alone that made the decision to utterly defy and ignore our oversight efforts. That's why we're voting today to authorize a subpoena to Massport. Whether the subpoena will in fact issue will depend in large part on Massport's actions moving forward. It's important to note we're not voting on today to authorize subpoenas on two other entities that we had planned to and noticed initially, Bonterra and New Point Strategies. That's because both of those efforts have now made good faith efforts to comply. Bonterra, a tech company that was the subject of an oversight report I put out last year about how tech platforms were deplatforming conservative organizations with which they disagreed politically. Bonterra, like Massport, had refused to comply with reasonable oversight. However, upon noticing this hearing to authorize the issuance of a subpoena, Bonterra reached out and affirmatively agreed to provide the requested documents by March 19th. I intend to hold the company to that commitment. Similarly, just last night, the second of the three subpoenas that we were going to vote on today, the subpoena directed at New Point Strategies. Just last night, New Point Strategies reached out and affirmatively produced the documents we had requested. I intend to review those documents and ensure that New Point, which was given thousands of taxpayer dollars to conduct, quote, diversity training for Department of Commerce employees, is held to account. New Point is one of several companies whose products run afoul of the President's recent executive order on ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. I worry that vendors like New Point have been attempting to whitewash their liberal bias and rebrand materials to evade the President's directive. For example, the company has suddenly and magically deleted multiple pages from its website, including an incriminating article titled, quote, "Don't cut back on DEI. Here are 3 reasons why." When you attempt to access that article now, you get a 404 error that suddenly the website page in question no longer exists. The committee will remain vigilant as we review this recent production. There are times when we should be firm. Bonterra and New Point's compliance in the face of their previous refusal to comply demonstrates what can be accomplished with even a little pressure. So I urge my colleagues today to vote to authorize a subpoena to Massport and send a clear message that there are consequences for failing to comply with congressional oversight. I now turn to the ranking member for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee is voting on motions to authorize the chair to issue subpoenas on a broad array of documents to Massport, the operator of Boston Logan Airport. Mr. Chair, while I'm all in for this committee conducting oversight responsibly to dig into matters that may inform the committee about necessary changes in legislation or oversight, I am concerned that this subpoena authorization at this time doesn't meet that standard. Going back at least 20 years, the chair and ranking member of this committee typically work together and reach consensus on subpoenas being issued because there is no question the matter being investigated was improper or the party being investigated was not being cooperative. The subpoena authorization being requested today, I believe, is premature. When I heard your arguments, Mr. Chairman, I do not believe that you've exhausted all the options in your capacity, given that Massport is responding to seek the information and documentations, and now you are getting communication from them. Regarding Logan Airport, the facts are simple. Senator Cruz, as a ranking member, asked Massport for written answers to a series of questions. While they have not yet provided responses in recent days, Massport has promised in writing to answer all of Chairman Cruz's question by March 10th, which is 5 days from now. This way may well be good, but the issues of the investigation, whether migrants sleeping at the airport and whether that violated federal law or grant insurances, this practice ended 8 months ago when the Massachusetts governor, Maura Healey, banned it and closed that operation. The motion to authorize the subpoena to Massport isn't the only matter that was put on the agenda, and the chairman mentioned this other issue, and I don't know whether you plan to take action. I heard your comments, but I just want to say something about Newport Strategies, a small woman-owned business that is simply fulfilled a contract competitively awarded in the Trump administration in 2018. Senator Cruz wanted to authorize the subpoena to this small company for documents related to the contract, provided basic workforce training on sexual harassment and federal discrimination laws. The chair has since withdrawn his request to authorize this subpoena, and Newport has provided documents. This voluntary production proves that the chairman can get the information requested just by threatening the subpoenas. And I want to point out how unnecessary it is to even request those documents from Newport, voluntary or otherwise, since the contract is with the Department of Commerce. So the Department of Commerce could have easily given us that information. Let me say again, employment training to prevent workplace harassment of any kind is not DEI indoctrination or propaganda. Instead, is just really good risk management. According to the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission in 2019 through 2024, the federal government paid out $826 million to federal employees who were victims of illegal demonstration in the workplace. The public sector, state and local governments, and employers paid over $2.3 billion during that same time frame. So yes, discrimination happens, and good ways to prevent it by listening to people who are in the HR business, I think is a pretty good idea. These types of trainings help save money for taxpayers and for companies. And this committee has seen firsthand the numerous effects of sexual harassment, sexual violence in the workplace. We have to look no further than the Operation Fouled Anchor, a Coast Guard investigation into the reports of sexual assault and sexual violence at the Coast Guard Academy and at sea, which were swept under the rug by the Coast Guard. This scandal has had a profound effect, not only on the survivors of sexual assault and harassment, but the reputation of the Coast Guard as a safe place to launch a career. So this committee, as well as others in the Senate, investigated this matter. It led to the provisions of the Coast Guard bill to improve training and awareness and to continue to get the Coast Guard to restore the confidence in the ranks. So I do believe that these HR efforts can be very effective. What we know is sexual harassment and anti-discrimination trainings are an important tool to expose these behaviors and prevent them from becoming normalized. And even if there is no sexual harassment or unlawful discrimination, diversity, equity, inclusion policies, this issue of the Coast Guard, as you know, Mr. Chairman, must be dealt with. I do believe that this committee needs to continue to, let me just say something about this as it relates to our committee. For example, to meet air traffic controller needs, the FAA must continue to attract high-quality candidates from all backgrounds. This requires targeted hiring initiatives to recruit a broad base of talent that is better positioned to overcome the high washout rate of the FAA's academy. Under Administrator Whitaker, this FAA maintained a rigorous hiring standard with strict qualifications while implementing smart recruiting strategies. So I'm sure we'll talk more about this in the future. So I want to, again, work with my colleagues on legislation that I think the committee should be spending our time on. I firmly believe that this committee has had a long history in recent years of producing great legislation. The infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science bill, and now I think we have a challenge to produce a new aviation safety bill, work on the surface transportation bill, and as the president said last night, let's get busy at shipbuilding. I'm more than happy to do that. But these are the issues we should be focusing on instead of these document requests that people seem to be complying with. I do think that my colleagues will have a lot to say about this, and as we've seen this morning, you are making progress. Massport has agreed to a response to you by March 10th, so I see no need for a subpoena today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cantwell. I'll note a couple of things in observation. Number one, describing Newpoint and their DEI instructions, the ranking member said, well, that was simply sexual harassment training and anti-discrimination training. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and that's the problem with DEI. DEI is not urging people to comply with federal law, and it is not urging people do not discriminate based on race. If it were doing that, that would be consistent with federal law. DEI is precisely the opposite. It is a radical left-wing ideology that urges institutions to affirmatively and aggressively discriminate based on race and discriminate based on gender and discriminate based on sexual orientation. It is that discrimination, which is both fundamentally wrong and contrary to federal law, that became the driving impetus of the Biden administration. As the ranking member said, over $800 million was spent indoctrinating employees that you must discriminate based on race. That is directly contrary to our civil rights laws, which is why the American people are so profoundly unhappy with the farce that is called DEI. I would note as well the prospect of housing illegal aliens in public airports, illegal aliens who may well be criminals, who may well be violent, who may well be gang members, who may well pose a security threat to the flying public, is a gross dereliction of the responsibility anyone receiving federal funds has. And this committee has an obligation to ascertain the extent to which and the reason that misuse of funds occurred. Did it occur with the blessing and encouragement of federal officials? Senator Cantwell said that Massport has agreed to answer questions in the letter. That is true. What Massport refuses to do is hand over any of the documents. That refusal raises an obvious inference that those documents contain information that Massport desperately wants this committee not to see. The subpoena for which we will be voting to authorize is to subpoena those documents. Those documents are directly responsive to the request they were given. And I'll point out, Massport could have behaved like Chicago O'Hare. Massport could have behaved like JFK and complied with the oversight. Massport apparently believes that the Senate has no jurisdiction in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If they believe that, that belief is an error. And with that, I'll recognize Senator Blackburn for a motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation hereby authorizes its chairman to issue a subpoena to the Massachusetts Port Authority for, number one, documents and communications referring or relating to the sheltering of illegal aliens at Logan International Airport, including communications with third parties such as the federal government, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, City of Boston, and nonprofit organizations. Two, documents and communications referring or relating to any security incident or law enforcement action involving an illegal alien at Logan International Airport or on aircraft flying into or out of Logan International Airport. And number three, organizational charts and documents identifying individuals and entities involved in the sheltering of illegal aliens at Logan International Airport. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second? There's a second. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Peters.
Mr. Chairman, I am opposed to this motion, and having served as chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, which is the primary oversight committee for the U.S. Senate, I certainly fully support and fully know the importance of strong, vigilant, and objective oversight. And the most effective oversight is achieved in a good faith, bipartisan manner that follows established procedures and practices and is focused on results and not show votes. That's why I'm disappointed today that we're having the first partisan markup of a subpoena authorization on this committee in recent history. Subpoenas should be a last-ditch effort to compel testimony or information from a legitimate target for oversight that has repeatedly refused to cooperate with the committee, and ideally after bipartisan request. In this case, we know that the recipient has already agreed to voluntarily provide the information that has been requested to this point, which makes this authorization unnecessary. The subpoena authorization is also very broad in scope and much broader than what was asked for in the first place, in the first request for information. And finally, I'm concerned by the potential politically motivated nature of the subpoena. Premature and overbroad as it is, it's directed at a local government entity. As a champion of bipartisan oversight, I welcome the opportunity to work with my colleagues across the aisle on legitimate oversight inquiries. However, I don't believe this is the situation at hand that we have today, which is why I plan to oppose this motion and would urge my colleagues to do the same as we continue to work together and find ways to work together in a bipartisan way.
I thank Senator Peters for his comments. I would note there is some irony to his comments in that just this year, Senator Peters is the ranking member on his GAC, who voted in a voice vote to give the chairman of his GAC the unilateral authority to issue subpoenas, which it now has, and the chairman of that committee is, of course, a Republican now. I'll point out as well that Senator Peters urged that subpoenas should be good faith and bipartisan. In this instance, the subpoena is most certainly in good faith. It is the result of multiple and repeated communications with Massport. Not only the initial letters, but 9 separate inquiries, both phone and email, trying to follow up on those inquiries. And it stands in stark contrast to how other entities that received those inquiries behaved. JFK Airport in New York is hardly some right-wing Republican institution. Chicago O'Hare Airport in Illinois is hardly some right-wing institution, and yet both managed to comply with this committee's oversight. Massport's behavior was markedly different. It was characterized by a complete lack of concern that it was subject to any oversight whatsoever. You are right that Massport is a local entity, but it is a local entity that actively solicits and receives millions of dollars of federal taxpayer funds. And those federal taxpayer funds are given for an explicit purpose, and that purpose was misused. Now, Senator Peters said that oversight and subpoenas are better if they're in good faith and bipartisan. This one is certainly in good faith, but I have sadly little hope that it will be bipartisan. And the reason I have little hope that it will be bipartisan is I do not see any of my Democrat colleagues expressing any interest in finding out why federal funds were diverted to house illegal immigrants under the policy of the Biden administration that allowed 12 million people to flood into this country illegally and that victimized thousands of Americans to violent crimes all over the country. The state of Massachusetts right now is still refusing to cooperate with ICE and federal authorities. Indeed, they are releasing violent child molesters who are illegal aliens. They're doing that in the past 30 days. Massachusetts has violent child molesters who are illegal aliens who can and should be deported, but their politics matters more than protecting children, and so they're releasing violent child molesters into the community. Now, Senator Peters, I understand partisan disagreements on what the top marginal tax rate should be, and we can have discussions back and forth about whether it should be a little bit higher or a little bit lower. I will confess I'm at a loss on how someone explains that it is a good idea, that what we need is more violent child molesters being released in our community. That nonetheless is the current behavior of officials in Massachusetts, which may explain Massport's defiance. And so I would extend an invitation to Senator Peters. If you would prefer that this oversight be bipartisan, I welcome you to join us. I have little hope that will happen, but you are certainly welcome to make it bipartisan and to say that Massport is not somehow unique from the authority of this committee in a way that no other entity is. Is there any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to start by taking a moment to set the record straight on the motion to authorize a subpoena to the Massachusetts Port Authority. This subpoena motion is a fishing expedition into the Massachusetts government. It is unfair, unnecessary, and unprecedented, and it leads this committee down a very dangerous path. First, let's be clear. There are no migrants sheltering at Logan Airport, none, and there have been none since July of 2024, 8 months ago. This issue is resolved and over. Second, congressional committees, including this committee, have historically authorized subpoenas as a last resort, only after repeatedly attempting and failing to obtain voluntary compliance with a party. While I understand that Massport did not respond to the chairman's letters last year, before he was chairman, they have since agreed to voluntarily respond to his written questions by March 10th, 5 days from now. And yet, we're still wasting time and resources with today's markup. And finally, this subpoena authorization is extraordinarily broad, requiring Massport to turn over documents and communications involving numerous public and private entities in Massachusetts. Yet the chairman first requested these documents and communications just last week. In other words, we're wasting time and resources litigating an issue that is already resolved with a cooperating party on a request for documents first made just 10 days ago. This is no way to conduct a congressional investigation. And at the same time, this committee is ignoring critical issues that are within our jurisdiction. Let's take aviation safety. On Thursday of last week, you can hold that up, please hold it up higher. Elon Musk tweeted, here's what he said last Thursday. To be clear here, the Verizon communication system to air traffic control is breaking down very rapidly. The FAA assessment is single digits months to catastrophic failure, putting air traveler safety at serious risk. The Starlink terminals are being sent at no cost to the taxpayer on an emergency basis to restore air traffic connectivity. The situation is extremely dire. Extremely dire. Air traffic safety. Hair on fire from Elon Musk inside of the computer system, getting all the information he needs. That's what he's saying to our community. We could have another accident. It's dire. Instead, we're talking about a cooperating entity that is willing to cooperate with the committee on information requested only 10 days ago. This is 5 days ago. This is 6 days ago. This is from Elon Musk. He's saying we could have an air tragedy. We could be losing hundreds of people in an air tragedy. The situation is dire. Where's the subpoena to Elon Musk? Where's the subpoena to the acting head of the FAA? Where's that hearing? That's what we should be having right now. Let's put that information out. Let's do whatever we can do as the Committee of Oversight to ensure that the resources are there, that this is corrected. So if ever there was missing a forest for the trees, this is what we're doing in the committee here today. And so we've got the Cassandra-like warning. It's about as scary a message as I have ever heard. People are getting increasingly afraid to travel on planes, and the guy in charge of the oversight is saying that they should be afraid. Is that the message the Commerce Committee wants to be sending to the American public, that they should be afraid to fly, that conditions are dire, that it could be catastrophic? Instead, we're talking about something that ended last July and that the entity is willing to cooperate. I don't think that's a good use of our time. I don't think that's a good use of our time. Let's have that hearing. That's why I sent a letter to you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member on Monday of this week, requesting that Elon Musk appear, requesting that I will have an amendment. Yes, I will. I will have an amendment. But that, to me, is what this issue is all about. And at this point, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Senator Markey, are you?
Well, I'd like to first
yes.
make amendment number one, Markey number one, yes. If the amendment could be called up, I'd like to call up amendment number one to the Massport subpoena.
Please proceed.
Okay. This amendment narrows the scope of any subpoena to Massport to the written questions that the then ranking member asked Massport last year. As currently drafted, the subpoena authorization is breathtakingly broad. It would give the chairman sweeping unilateral authority to demand documents and communications involving numerous public and private entities in Massachusetts. In fact, the chairman first made the request for these documents and communications last week. Let's review the timeline. In March of 2024, then ranking member Cruz sent a letter seeking written answers to questions to Massport. It wasn't until Monday of last week, just 10 days ago, that the now chairman substantially expanded that request in a subpoena schedule provided to Massport. In that schedule, the chairman stated his intent to seek a vast amount of documents and communications from Massport related to migrants sleeping at Logan Airport. And he requested those documents dating back to January 1st of 2021, years before the incident that the chairman is purportedly investigating even occurred. This isn't the good governance investigation that the committee has historically been known for. This is a fishing expedition. And I understand that the chairman is frustrated that Massport did not respond to his questions last year, but the motion as drafted is not limited to those questions. Markey Amendment number 1 would fix that by limiting the scope of the subpoena to those written questions in the chairman's March of 2024 letter. And I firmly believe that even with my amendment, that this subpoena authorization is unnecessary and a waste of this committee's time and resources. And as I said, there are many more important issues that we should be debating in this committee as we're sitting here right now. But at the very least, the committee should not be authorizing its chairman, no matter who that person is, to demand communications and documents from a state entity that it requested for the first time just 10 days ago. So I just would ask my colleagues, in fairness, to not just Massachusetts, but to any state, to not allow any committee to say that after 10 days that there can be a subpoena issued by a congressional committee. It's just not fair. It should be limited just to the request which the chairman made last year, and I ask for support on my motion.
Well, I appreciate Senator Markey's remarks in support of aviation safety, and aviation safety is most certainly a priority of all members of this committee on both the Republican and Democrat side. I will note Senator Markey made a reference in his remarks. He said that there have been no more illegal aliens housed at Logan Airport since July of 2024. That remark is in error, and I'm going to read from a Boston Globe article dated September 17th, 2024, substantially after July of 2024. The headline is, "Migrant Families Return to Logan, Raising Questions About State Shelter Restrictions." On Monday night, about a dozen Haitian migrants slept in Terminal A. And without objection, I'm going to enter this article into the record. The senator for Massachusetts spoke passionately about concerns for aviation safety, and yet as we sit here, this committee does not know the answer to a great many questions about the longstanding practice of Logan and the Biden administration of housing hundreds, perhaps thousands of illegal aliens in airports meant for the traveling public. How many security incidents occurred with illegal aliens being placed in airports? How many women were assaulted by illegal aliens housed in public airports? How many children were assaulted by illegal aliens housed at Logan Airport? How many of the illegal immigrants housed at Logan Airport had criminal convictions? How many had convictions for homicide? How many had convictions for rape? How many had convictions for child molestation? How many were members of violent gangs that have now been designated as foreign terrorist organizations? Of the illegal immigrants that were housed in airports, how many of them had weapons? How many of them had weapons within the security perimeter? How many of those illegal aliens attempted to access secure areas of the airport, such as the tarmac or other places that are designed to keep the traveling public safe. In response to that, the senator from Massachusetts has no answers because none of us have answers. Because Massport will not answer those questions, and what they are fighting tooth and nail against is actually producing the documents that have been requested. The senator from Massachusetts suggested that those documents were just requested 10 days ago. That is not correct. The March letter was not the only correspondence with Massport. On August 9th, 2024, which is a lot more than 10 days ago, I sent a subsequent letter detailing the documents they were to preserve and explicitly stating that preservation was so they could be subject to compulsory process. Massport could have avoided this hearing today by doing what Bonterra did and doing what Newpoint did. This is not a secret. They knew how to avoid the subpoena. They could comply. 2 of the 3 who were noticed did that. Massport did not, which to me raises the inference that those documents, the answers to the questions I just laid out, are even worse than we might be imagining. If they are not, Massport could provide those documents. Senator Markey's amendment would take away this committee's ability to get those documents and answer those questions. And so I would urge members to vote no on Senator Markey's amendment.
Mr. Chairman, okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Markey.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have your letter from August 9th of 2024, which you just made reference. And just so it's very clear, that letter that you sent to Massport on August 9th of 2024 did in fact ask for a preservation of documents, but it never asked them to be provided to you. You did not make that request. You did not make that request. So it's inaccurate to claim that you ever sent Massport a letter asking them to provide you documents. You never did that. A document preservation letter is not the same thing as a document request letter. They're 2 separate things. So just to make it clear, if you want to make that motion to request those documents, make it. Have this committee deal with that issue. But you have never asked for it. And it's unfair to ask Massport or any regional airport authority to be asked to now pay a penalty for something that they were never asked to do. It's just not right. It's not fair. So just to me, and again, I ask that your letter be included in the record.
Without objection.
So that it's very clear that you never asked for the documents or any communications. You're now seeking communications as well. Was never made in this letter.
So I would note, if the burden is somehow unfair or unreasonable, somehow JFK managed to comply, somehow O'Hare managed to comply, somehow Bonterra managed to comply, somehow Newpoint managed to comply. The only entity that is refusing to comply is Massport. And in the August 9th letter, I will read what it says explicitly, quote, "If you refuse to answer a question or produce documents, state so specifically and provide the reason for your refusal. In similar circumstances, failure to answer such congressional inquiries has resulted in Congress compelling parties to respond." Massport has understood that compulsory process was on the table at least since August 9th of 2024. Senator Cantwell, did you have additional comments?
Yes.
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, if we limit it just to August 9th, which is what my amendment does, then I think you're within the purview of this committee's, I think, responsible use of its power. But you never made a request to provide you any documents that or communications from the Port Authority. So I just think it's unfair. There's no due process here. This is just a violation of fundamental due process for Massport or for any subject of any subpoena that will ever come from this committee.
Okay.
You made the
Senator
request.
Cantwell,
You made the request last Monday for these documents for the communication. It is unfair then to say that you 10 days later are going to issue a subpoena. And by the way, notice this within the same week that you made the request. It's just unfair because the request is comprehensive It is very broad. It's a fishing expedition, and there should be given to Massport or any entity ever subpoenaed by this committee a reasonable amount of time in order to respond.
Apparently, the senator from Massachusetts believes it is a fishing expedition to want to know if violent criminal illegal aliens threatened or actually committed acts of violence against the traveling public. That strikes me as right at the heart of this committee's responsibility. I would note the senator has already had 15 minutes arguing for this amendment, and we have issues with maintaining a quorum. So does Senator Cantwell have any comments on this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I could, and I appreciate Senator Markey offering his amendment, and particularly the clarity of that last point, which is, you know, Mr. Chairman, you brought up several times these other issues, these other subpoenas, these other activities, which aren't really related to airports at all. So comparing apples and oranges and saying the process and the compliance is had no problems, I mean, it makes no sense. And I think what people are looking for here is a standard and a mark by consistency. Having been on the committee for many years and seen many subpoena operations and opportunities, people are always trying to crystallize what exactly is it that people are after, what information. So when I think the senator from Massachusetts is making a point that when you send a letter that basically asked a whole variety of questions from your staff, basically sending a letter last year asking for lots of questions to be answered, is different than actual subpoena documentation. We know this well from our committee from a couple of different aviation safety cases, that being specific about what documents you're actually requesting and the chairman actually requesting those are a very different answer than sending emails to a company saying, please answer 45 different questions. And so we're trying to be crisp here in what legal process we're really going to ask for and vote on. But now that you've asked for that documentation, they are saying, we're going to give it to you in 5 days, by next Monday. So I just want to clarify on the underlying point, Mr. Chairman, there are no migrants. This is an issue that stopped last July. Yes, you brought up an article. My sense is that Logan Airport is quickly responding to that. These are not people that were in a non-secure area of the airport. They were not on the other side of TSA. They were not wandering around about to get on flights. And
Does Senator Cantwell know that, and how do you know that?
That is our communication from the airport and other airports.
Would the gentlelady yield, please?
Yes.
This is a letter from Massport to the committee. It comes from Richard Davey, the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of Massport. Here's what he says. Thank you for your response. I also wanted to make clear that Massport will respond to the questions already presented on or before March 10th of 2025 and respectfully ask the committee to forego issuing subpoenas until you have seen our complete response. March 10th is Monday coming up. So can we at least wait until we see what they've voluntarily sent you before we begin to have a process here of subpoenaing additional information? That would be just the minimal request I would make, just a postponement until next week of this.
So I would say two things in response. Number one, this was not one single question or one single email. Rather, this was two separate, detailed, formal letters on letterhead as the ranking member of this committee, specifying precisely the documents that were sought and the questions that were sought. And in between, there were 9 separate communications. Massport stood as an outlier. Everyone else subject to this oversight complied. Massport believed it is not subject to this committee's jurisdiction. That belief is in error. And I would note, Senator Cantwell said a minute ago, well, now Massport is going to comply. No, they are not. They are saying they will answer the questions, but they are adamantly refusing to hand over the documents. The documents that have been requested, they are not handing over. And I'll note finally, this vote is not to issue the subpoena, but rather an authorization to issue the subpoena. If Massport wants to avoid the issuance of a subpoena, it has a very easy path forward, which is it can provide the documents that will answer the questions about how federal funds were misused and how and to what extent the flying public was endangered because of the political agenda that was being imposed on the airport. And with that, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Thune?
No by proxy.
Mr. Wicker? No. Mrs. Fisher? Mr. Moran? Mr. Sullivan? Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Young?
No by proxy.
Mr. Budd? Mr. Schmidt? Mr. Curtis? Mr. Moreno?
No by proxy.
Mr. Sheehy?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Capito?
No by proxy.
Ms. Lummis?
No by proxy.
Ms. Cantwell?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schatz?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Markey?
Aye.
Mr. Peters?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Baldwin?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Duckworth?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Rosen?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Lujan?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hickenlooper?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Fetterman?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kim?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Blunt Rochester?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
No.
The noes are 15, the yeses are 13.
The amendment is not adopted. Are there additional amendments?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that we don't have a majority here to actually pass the bill, the subpoena request out of committee. So I'm asking what you think the further process is here.
So we have a sufficient quorum to resolve amendment votes, because amendment votes can be adopted by proxy. My hope is that we will get a sufficient quorum to actually resolve the motion. If we do not get a sufficient quorum to resolve the motion, then we will reconvene this markup at a separate time, probably later today, and hopefully get our quorum.
Did it occur that maybe you could wait until next Monday to find out whether the information that you get, and then
We're going to proceed one way or the other. But we're going to move expeditiously. So if there are additional amendment, both you and Senator Markey had amendment votes, and I'm happy to consider those votes and resolve them. Yes. So that if we do have to reconvene at a later time, it will be very expeditious.
Mr. Chairman, I think you have to have 9 members, right, for amendments, as opposed, you just stated that you could do it all by proxy.
No, we do so.
Okay.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up amendment number 4.
Senator Markey, you may proceed with your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment adds further authority for the chairman to seek a subpoena for 2 companies along with the United States Department of Transportation for documents and communications relating to a political stunt orchestrated by the state of Florida in September of 2022. Florida used interest earned on COVID-19 state and local recovery funds to arrange for a group of Venezuelan migrants to be flown from Texas through Florida to Martha's Vineyard. The migrants were told that they were traveling to Boston or Washington, D.C., or would receive housing and employment assistance. All of that was one big lie. Instead, they were brought to Martha's Vineyard, where a Fox News camera was waiting to exploit their difficult circumstances. This inhumane stunt may have violated the United States Department of Transportation's charter broker rule, which prohibits brokers from misrepresenting the destination of a charter flight, and may have been an unlawful use of COVID-19 recovery funds. In September of 2022, I sent letters to both the Department of Treasury, Office of Inspector General, and the U.S. Department of Transportation, urging them to investigate. Both responded within a few months, indicating that they were investigating within their respective jurisdictions. If this committee intends to use its compulsory power to investigate incidents that occurred in previous years, I see no reason why we should also not examine this outrageous abuse. Of course, I'd rather we scrap both of these unnecessary investigations and return to the bread and butter issues that are squarely within the committee's jurisdiction, which includes Elon Musk saying that there is a dire condition in the aviation sector of the American economy right now. We should be examining those alarmist statements to determine whether or not our air traffic control system is in fact operating in a way that is safe and efficient at this time. Elon Musk says it is not. And what impact DOGE's cuts may have on transportation safety in our country. That's our principal responsibility here. But if the chairman intends on going down this path, then this committee should investigate Florida's cold-hearted political stunt as well. There are real questions as to its legality, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Well, I thank my friend from Massachusetts for raising this amendment. I actually think this amendment raises an important issue. Back in October of 2021, in the first year of the Biden administration, I introduced legislation that would change where illegal immigrants were sent and not have them sent in mass numbers to Texas and other places, which unfortunately my Democrat colleagues seem not to care about the crimes of violence that were committed, about the enormous burden. And instead, my legislation proposed we move them to Martha's Vineyard and other places like Nantucket and the Hamptons and Palo Alto, where rich liberals sip Chardonnay and explain that those mean red states don't want 12 million people invading them. Now, at the time I filed that legislation, the elected officials in and around Martha's Vineyard had quite a lot to say. In fact, I want to quote from what the county commissioner at Martha's Vineyard said in response to my legislation. Keith Chattenover said in response to this legislation, quote, "I would love Martha's Vineyard to become a haven for new immigrants to this country, but Senator Cruz has no idea what he's talking about regarding a border crisis." He continued, "Immigrants make our country stronger, as evidenced by immigration from Brazil and other countries to the Vineyard, and he is trying to whip up the racial anxieties for political gain, which is essentially the entire GOP platform anyway." Well, we now know that that county commissioner was utterly and completely full of nonsense. How do we know that? Because some months later, Governor Ron DeSantis did precisely what I had proposed in my legislation. He flew to Martha's Vineyard, not 10,000 illegal immigrants, not 1,000 illegal immigrants, not even 500. He flew 50 illegal immigrants to Martha's Vineyard. And suddenly the self-righteous officials who claim Senator Cruz does not know what he's talking about on illegal immigration, despite the fact that I represent Texas and our state has seen firsthand the suffering that Democrat open border policies have caused. 50 illegal immigrants arriving on Martha's Vineyard caused those hypocritical officials to immediately declare a public emergency and to deport and physically remove those illegal immigrants within 24 hours. It was truly a stunning display of hypocrisy. The very same people who said we would welcome immigrants to Martha's Vineyard as a haven when they actually arrived, put them in handcuffs and removed them within 24 hours. So, I will note, however, Senator Markey's amendment is different from his first one. Senator Markey's amendment does not remove the authorization for Massport. It simply adds an additional authorization for Martha's Vineyard. And so expanding the authority to examine what happened at Martha's Vineyard, I'm certainly amenable to that. And so I'm willing to accept Senator Markey's amendment, and I'm fine to accept it by a voice vote.
I'd like a roll call.
Okay, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Thune, It's not a quorum.
Now the clerk will call the roll, and I recommend that members vote aye.
Mr. Thune,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Wicker, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Moran, Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Young,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Budd, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Curtis,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Moreno,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Sheehy,
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Capito,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Lummis,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Cantwell,
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schatz,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Markey,
Aye.
Mr. Peters,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Baldwin,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Duckworth,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Rosen,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Lujan,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hickenlooper,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Fetterman,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kim,
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Blunt Rochester,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
The ayes are 28.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we have a quorum to continue business. I do want to say on that last amendment.
Just one moment. The amendment is adopted. I'll recognize you momentarily. Because we don't have a
I just
quorum
want-
to resolve this motion right now, the committee will reconvene at a later time today when we're able to assemble a quorum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I did want to say, I think this last amendment crystallized an issue related to what it is that we should focus on. And the issue is whether, in this case, the Markey Amendment, whether somebody violated the misuse of what are aviation dollars at a Florida airport. I think by continuing to crystallize as a committee what documentation that we seek, as opposed to the broader allegations of what somebody thinks is or is not being done in the state of Massachusetts, I think will help the committee moving forward. So I appreciate the senator from Massachusetts helping to highlight this issue, and certainly wanted to say that our committee does believe that if airports misuse misuse federal dollars, that is something. But let's get a request process that's not, that's clear on a subpoena and the documents we seek. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The committee is adjourned until a later time today.